welcome to Possibilities, the show where we give people living with a variety of different abilities and their loved ones a space to share their lives with the world. Thank you for joining us today. And here's your host, Danny Steeves.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome to today's episode of Possibilities. Today we have a very special episode. I'm joined today by Peter Rosenbaum, a professor at the National Hospital in Hamilton, and also joining us is Jessica Gable, accessibility advocate from Hamilton, and making her return on the show is Kelly Meisner. So welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. Today, we're gonna dive into a topic that we've been exploring a while on the Possibility Show, and that is the topic of common misconceptions of people with disabilities. So, Peter, I thought we might start with you. What do you think is the most common misconception when it comes to people with disabilities?
I'm not sure I can tell you which is the most common, but one very frequent assumption is that anything that is of concern to a person with a disability is about their disability. And a powerful example of that is the story of a young woman told me some years ago at the Ontario Federation for Cerebral Palsy about the fact that she's a wheelchair user and she had abdominal pain. And she saw one physician after another for months, and they all said, well, that's because she has cerebral palsy. And somebody finally examined her carefully and found out she had a problem with her gallbladder. And once her gallbladder was removed, her abdominal pain disappeared. And that has prompted me since then to talk about the fact that everybody with cerebral palsy has a gallbladder. Simply to remind people that, you know, even though you have cerebral palsy and even though I wear glasses, we all have gallbladders. And that's a common misconception, is that everything that's a problem for you is about your condition.
Yeah. Now, Jessica, I know that you have PT
Yep.
as well, and so do I. Do you resonate with what Peter just said? What's your view on it?
Well, I definitely resonate with what Peter has just said. As someone who uses a wheelchair and canes, even from a medical standpoint, whenever I have any sort of pain or issue that could be anything related to my CP or otherwise, probably not my CP, the first thing they always say is, well, it's probably because you have CP, right? And that's actually often not the case, because I'm quite lucky to have moderate spastic diplegia. So my CP is pretty much handled. So anything new that I have is generally not related to my CP. I might have some residual pain or something like that, but usually if I have to go to a doctor, it has nothing to do with my CP. But they always bring my CP up first. And I was in a car accident in high school, just a mild one, and I had to go into the hospital, obviously, and they were looking at me and my feet and things. My legs and my feet look different than the average person. So they were like, oh my goodness, everything is all messed up. And I had to be like, no, this is normal, and this is normal, and this is normal. This bump on my head, though, not normal. Maybe we should look at that. But I had to, spend some time explaining to them everything on the lower half of my body is status quo, and we need to worry about this bump on my head. But I face many misconceptions in my day-to-day life. As someone who lives independently, I have my own apartment in Toronto. I work part-time. I'm in between contracts at the moment, but I just spent the last year working communications at the University of Guelph Humber. I went to school. I lived in residence. And the whole time along, everyone was always shocked that A, I went to school, B, I went independently. And now I work, so people are shocked that I work. And then the people that I work with are shocked that I live independently. So I'm not going to say I don't have any help. I have very good friends, and I can, reach out to services when I need it. But, 99% of the time I do okay. But people are always sure that I do very normal in life. But then when I do try to talk to them about my disability and the aspects of my life that it does make challenging, they become very uncomfortable. But it's never the things that they assume would be the issue.
Yeah, very good point. Jessica, we'll get back to it more in a bit here. But I want to touch on something you just said. When you were in a car accident, what did the doctors think was wrong with you?
They were very concerned. They were very concerned about the shape of my feet and my legs, because I have very clear CP and feet and lower leg. The shape of my foot is a little bit flatter and skinnier, and my toes are a bit more close together, and I have a slightly bigger bone around my big toe, and obviously my legs are quite a bit skinnier, and I have scars, and they don't always stay the straightest. So the doctors, as a nice young doctor, maybe hadn't been exposed to so much CP in his medical training up to that point, but he was very taken aback by what he saw when I took my shoes off. I guess I walked into the hospital because I refused to let them put me on a backboard. I was pretty sure that I was okay. But I guess he didn't see me walking with my canes. That was a different topic.
Okay. Kelly, what do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to people with disabilities?
I've got lots of key ones for sure. Yeah. I definitely want to add to the two experts that just have included a really good point that reminded me of something really important for my daughter Kate, who's 10 years old, and she lives with Angelman syndrome. And with Angelman syndrome, there's a pretty significant seizure disorder. And I feel like we had to constantly advocate to get her seizures under control. And just kind of like Peter mentioned, we experienced the very similar idea of, well, she has Angelman syndrome, of course she's going to have seizures. And we advocated pretty strongly with the physicians until we finally found a neurologist who really shared our idea that if Kate were a little girl who were neurotypical and didn't live with Angelman syndrome, and her seizures prevented her from doing her math or prevented her from playing piano, absolutely we would try and get her seizures under control. So we really come from that point of view that just because she has Angelman doesn't mean we can't aim high and get the seizures under control, because that's going to help her quality of life overall. So I really appreciate that medical perspective is really something that's key. And we do run into, well, she has Angelman syndrome like we need to be reminded. We don't need to be reminded. And that should be the obvious thing for sure. But I think that now in the medical profession is one of the best times that you can live with epilepsy, because the seizure medications are really effective for a lot of people. So I really am happy that we pushed for that, because Kate hasn't had a tonic-clonic or a partial complex seizure in 3 years. I'm going to knock on wood right now so I don't jinx myself. But that's pretty amazing. So we're really, really pleased with that. So thank you for bringing those 2 points up. That was really awesome. My biggest thing for misconceptions for people who live with developmental disabilities is that they can't learn. People think they can't learn. And that really bothers me, because Kate does a lot of learning. Like, she's learned to walk, she's learned to navigate her body. We see evidence of her learning every day. Sometimes it takes a long time though, right? That the processing time for her is really a significant thing. Like, by the time her brain can synthesize the message and deliver it to her body, most of the people around her have already moved on, right? And so they think she doesn't understand. She totally understands. She just can't engage at that pace to show that she does understand. So I think that's the biggest barrier that we deal with when we're interacting with everybody, like the community, the schools. Everybody needs to really make sure that they appreciate that Kate has a fully intact brain. It just can't connect as quickly as what the standard is for everybody else. But that doesn't mean that she can't learn. Like, if you've been able to learn to do things over time, then that is evidence that learning is possible.
Peter, if you could you weigh in on some of your medical things that was brought up, and tell us why doctors think just because we have a disability that something else must be wrong with us?
Well, there are a lot of reasons, and I think partly it's because our training is limited in many ways, and some of us are trying to deal with that. I'll come back to that in a minute. But if we learn about people with any health condition, and let's move away from disability for a minute, where do we see patients with cancer? Well, when we're training, we usually see them in the hospital where they're sick and they're getting, aggressive treatment and they're not feeling well. And so we think about cancer and we remember that patient who's lost their hair, who is suffering the side effects of the medication. And so cancer becomes a scary idea. Similarly, if people learn about, in our case, childhood disability by seeing children in the hospital or seeing children in the clinic with problems, we don't do a very good job of finding out what the children can do. So I teach all my learners to start by interview with a family by saying, what do you want to brag about? And I say to parents, if you're not going to brag, I don't want to see you, go home. And most parents are quite delighted with that, because we're so busy focusing on what people can't do, that we don't pay attention to what they can do. When I lecture, and I do a lot of lecturing around the world, I introduce myself as a non-Asian, non-woman. People think that's pretty freaky, and they wonder why the hell they invited me. And I say, I think you can see that that's probably an accurate description, but it tells you nothing about what I am. And so, and because our focus is so much on the problems, we forget to find out what is working.
Kelly, I noticed that you gave a thumbs up on one of Peter's points. Do you want to weigh in?
It's so refreshing to meet somebody who is so like-minded and progressive about what this experience is like for families, right? That families that have to go to the doctor for whatever the reason might be. It might be a checkup, or it might be your regular visit with your specialist in your hospital that's not in your region. So you've driven there, you've made an effort to be there, and to have someone start off the visit by saying, hey, you get a chance to brag out about your kid, I think I'd fall on the floor. That would be absolutely amazing. And that is so meaningful for families. Like, that's what they really need, right? We need to lift each other up because everybody is doing fantastic things. And that, Peter, thank you for trying to change the mindset there. It's so refreshing to find out that somebody's out there advocating for families like that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just will dive into this a little bit later in the time movie. But why do you what just the movie you can speak to? Because I find that a lot of people who think just because we have a disability, we need to look a certain way. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that is? I think it has a lot to do with what Peter was saying about what people tend to see, whether it be the doctors or what the general public sees in the media, where they see us in hospitals, they see us in wheelchairs looking sad and depressed and, not fitting in because of some kind of struggle. Very rarely, that struggle is very real. But very rarely is that the only aspect of life that we experience. I often tell people that I'm very honest about some of the challenges that I face as a person with a disability, especially as someone who is, not to brag too much, but as someone who is as functional and lucky as I am, I still have struggles. But on top of those struggles, I still have to want to do all the other things that the average person has to do and does, right? I have my CP and the various things that come with that, but on top of it, I also, went to school and now have to work and pay bills and want to hang out with my friends and travel and, pay my taxes and do all the things that regular adults have to do. I still have to find ways to grocery shop and take care of all of my activities of daily life on top of things that might come up in my life to my disability that maybe the average person doesn't experience. But I don't think that people see that. And like I said earlier, when it does come up, often it kind of makes them uncomfortable. It's kind of like, racism. You don't really talk about racism, but everyone's aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think disability is handled in a very similar way.
Yeah.
So I think that that's where that misconception comes.
again, um, may I just say that the first time I met you, because Peter and you and I are on the same board together, and you are usually on the phone, so
Yeah.
so when I first heard your voice, I was like, but she has a disability. I didn't know that. So you may I say that your disability doesn't show at all. So thank you for
Thank you.
being an advocate on that.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to move on here because there's a few more topics that I want to discuss, and we're running a bit late on time here. So, Jessica, what what is the most embarrassing that happened to you in public because of your disability?
The most embarrassing thing that's happened to me because of my disability?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not really sure. I fall down a lot in public, especially in Toronto with those streetcar tracks and in the winter and things like that. But it doesn't really stop me per se. I just go for it. So, but a lot of times when I fall down, people around me will want to help, but they'll just come up and they'll start to sort of grab me from behind and pull, which is such a weird way to help someone up. I don't know how it occurs to people to just sort of grab someone who's kind of stuck on maybe all fours and just like grab someone around the middle and pull up. Like if the average person fell down, you would just offer them a hand and they would put like one foot up and then the other. And I guess people don't know if I can do that action, you know, like you kind of go like one foot and one knee and then you push. But I did a lot of physio to learn how to do that. So I'm very capable. But of all the ways that people can help me up, pulling me up from the middle from behind is so weird. And it never works really because then I'm sort of flailing to try to figure out how to get my legs to the ground. And then they don't maybe realize that I have poor balance and it takes me a minute to I have to set my feet a certain way. Right? I have to make sure that all of my limbs and my weight is in a certain position before I can sort of pull myself up, and then I need my cane. So hopefully somebody thinks to help someone else thinks to bring my canes up at the same time, because if they don't, then the person who's holding me up but in this awkward position that there's really no way back from except if they were to put me back on the ground, which is sometimes what I would prefer. If they're holding me up and don't want to set me down and my canes are still on the ground, then we're just sort of stuck in the middle of the sidewalk or sometimes in the middle of the road, which is terrifying.
Right.
In this situation. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, if you had just offered me a hand or asked me how you can help me, I would have appreciated your help, but I can tell you exactly how you can help me and we would have been done by now. So that is probably one of the most embarrassing and frustrating things that happens to me probably once every 3 to 4 months.
So, are you saying that they just come up to you and do that to you?
Yeah, because they're trying to help me.
Without asking?
Generally. And I understand, especially if I'm stuck if I fell on the streetcar tracks in the middle of in a crosswalk, you definitely want to get out of the way as soon as possible. So there's a sense of urgency for sure. So I appreciate that. But at the same time, what I've just described to you, like imagine being kind of on all fours, because I tend to fall forward, right? And someone just comes up and grabs you around the middle and tries to pull you up that way, but you have poor balance, and I'm little, so honestly it would probably be easier if they just like firemen lifted me to the other side of the street, especially if it's a nice gentleman. But they don't get to that point, right? So we just end up in this weird, awkward flailing situation. Sometimes my canes are picked up, sometimes they're not, and then if they're not, it's an extra element of like, okay, well, I have this disabled woman. How do I get her canes without putting her back on the ground? And I'm like, oh dear. How does it ever occur to someone to help someone up this way? Because if it was anyone else, they would just offer them a hand and you would go on your knees and then on one leg, and then you would be up. And maybe it's not immediately obvious that I can do that, but I think I should get a tattoo because I didn't learn it in physio.
Kelly, do you want to weigh in on
that? We actually experienced stuff very similar. I appreciate that Jessica says she learned that physio, how to get up from all fours and have someone offer a hand. And that's exactly what Kate has been trained to do as well. And it's the same kind of thing. When people are urgent, they will grab from behind or grab around the waist. And it's just, I don't know, I'm just really sensitive. As she gets older and stuff, I don't really want people to grab her like that. And I want her to be able to, advocate for a little bit of appropriate space. Right. But yeah, definitely Kate has learned to get up the exact same way. And that is the reason we've learned that way. That is the typical way that people get up from the ground. Yeah. You would offer a hand, and you can. Kate can get herself onto one knee, and then the other foot's out, and then she pops up, and that does so much more for where your center of gravity actually is when you're standing, and that's what you're speaking to there, Jessica. Is that they have moved your center of gravity by lifting you from behind. Of course, you're not be able to get balance really well. So
I need just like one hand, and if I can, one cane, and then I'm good. And then pass me my other cane, and we're okay. But yeah, and in terms of like appropriateness and just feeling safe too, in Toronto, I tend not to worry too much about my safety, because if I did, I wouldn't go out anywhere. As someone who, if you wanted to abduct me, you probably could. I am a small person with terrible balance. Like, you could just pick me up from behind and run away, and there's little I could do about it in the moment. So I tend not to worry about it. But in those moments of like appropriateness and safety and, awareness of stranger danger, you're just kind of like, oh, wait, please stop touching me.
Yeah, your hands are on me.
Like, what is happening? Right? So.
Speaking of Toronto, Jessica, one day I don't live in Toronto, but I was filming a accessibility video.
Yep.
And one day I was following a friend of mine who also in a power wheelchair, and it was right downtown Kennedy Market area, and you know how that street is always so crowded. I have really bad gut perception. I misjudge the sidewalk a lot, so I don't always drive myself, but in this case, I was, and I ended up putting off the sidewalk, not bad, but the wheel just
Yeah.
it came off, and I went over, and luckily there were two guys there, and they literally picked up my power wheelchair and lifted me on the sidewalk. So,
That is one of the good things about there being so many people in Toronto. That if you need something like that, and it's usually like that is more of a clear scenario of how to help. That is when you're happy to have so many people around. And I've had moments, I have a manual chair, but I've had moments where I've got kind of stuck on like the curb or in the sidewalk, because there's always seem to be parts of sidewalks in Toronto that need to be fixed. And you know, you're stuck like one wheel in like the divot or whatever off the curb, and then your other wheel is just spinning. So no matter how able I am, sometimes I still need someone to just kind of pick me up or give me a bit of a shove. So that is one of the good things about there being people in Toronto. But you gotta be careful about that, not letting people like push you off the sidewalk and stuff like that. I always tell my other friends from outside the city who come with their devices, or even one of my good friends, she has a power chair. I always tell her to drive with purpose, right? Like act like you know where you're going and don't let anyone take your space.
okay, Kelly, there's one area that I would love to get your opinion on, and that is the autism full cut in Ontario. I know Kate doesn't have autism, but what do you make of all these cuts that are going on in Ontario right now?
I think it's really, really tricky stuff. What's happening with the provincial cuts from many perspectives. I had an opportunity to engage in front of the office of my local MPP, and he came out of the office and started talking to some of the people that were there, and I just kind of said, "Hi, this is who I am, and I'm really worried that your government is ruining everything I care about." And I listed off healthcare, the environment, education, social services, just basically how we are caring for each other. They've seemed to have lost the plot of something that makes our country and our province so great is how we take care of each other. And I often feel like I don't want to make too many political statements, obviously, but I really, really feel that the way that we are perceived should not be that we are overly socialist. Taking care of each other is at the basic of what it is to be human and what it is to have survive over time. It's because we've taken care of each other. So I really have a lot of anxiety about what's happening with the proposed cutbacks. I do notice that the government seems to backtrack on the things that they say, which I think is also really stressful for families and professionals because it's hard to follow they're doing, and it's hard to believe that they're making some really good decisions, right? So we haven't put Kate into any kind of programming like IBI or ABA because she lives with Angelman syndrome, and that's not something that we felt was readily available or something that we should try. But I am nervous about those kinds of programs where they teach people to be not themselves, like eye contact thing, and make sure you're looking at who you're talking to and things like that. Those kinds of therapies make me a little bit nervous that way, but I can understand and appreciate that families need options to help them survive. And when you have those options taken away from you in one fell swoop, it is making a difficult life already harder, and completely inappropriate, and definitely not balanced for sure. I would like to see a better disability platform from Canada, specifically from the federal government. I'd like to see a better disability platform in general, and I definitely think Ontario can do better to make sure they're meeting the needs of every family. There are ways to be economically responsible and fiscally responsible. Taking services from families who absolutely need them is not the solution. Making crazy healthcare cuts is not the solution, for sure.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to bring Peter in on this conversation as well. Peter, are there many cuts that you see happening in your profession, or where are they on that scale?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
Do you see a lot of cuts happening where you are, or what is happening from your view on the cuts that are going on right now?
You're asking about the cuts?
Yeah.
Well, I share all of Kate's or Kelly's perspectives. I would say that the only good news is that the government has had to respond to pressure. And I don't think they've got it right yet. I think they had it grossly wrong. I think it's less wrong, but it's not just because they are doing different things. They are doing different things in response to the voices of parents. I think there's a lot more that they can be doing. And I would add to what Kelly said, that I think that the approach that the government has had for at least 20 years with respect to the autism funding is unethical, because they are favoring one condition over other conditions. And what that means to families and what that means to health professionals is sometimes we have to say that somebody has autism so they will get access to services, even if we don't think they have autism. And that's unacceptable. And there are really other ways that we could be thinking about things, including, of course, paying attention to what people's functional abilities are and what their functional needs are, rather than what their diagnosis is. I mean, two of you have cerebral palsy. One of you walks with a cane and one of you is a full-time wheelchair user. You both have the same condition in terms of the label, but your needs are different, and they should be, and they are individualized.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I could just speak to that for a minute. I think what is interesting, something that I've recently experienced in that line, is having to sort of change my reality to qualify for a new wheelchair.
Yep.
And to qualify for a smart drive, which is a battery powered wheel to go on the back of my chair to help me go a little bit faster. And part of the reason why that is helpful to me is because I do walk so often that when I do need to use my chair, I'm not as good at it as I would be if I was a full-time wheelchair user. I have more muscle in my legs than I do I probably have more muscle in my arms, but my legs have more muscle and ability than some of my other friends who use their chair more often. And therefore, when I use my chair, my friends who use their wheelchairs all the time make fun of me that I'm slow. So, you can't win. But I walk faster than all of my other friends with CP and canes, right? So, we all win some and we all lose some. But
Yeah.
I benefit from having a smart drive to put a little battery powered Bluetooth operated wheel that goes on the back of my chair when I want it to help me go a little bit faster, keep up with my friends, and not become as tired. I used it in the airport recently. It was fantastic. I hate wheeling through the airport because it's so big and there's people around, but this time I just like sped through, no problem. But in order to qualify for both the wheelchair and the smart drive, I had to sort of fudge the details of my reality of how far I could walk and whether or not I use the wheelchair in my house, which I honestly don't because I live in a small apartment in Toronto. But when I get outside of my house, right? But you know, my OT was like, "Do you do these things?" And I'd be like, "Yes." And she'd be like, "No, you don't." And I'd be like, "Thank you for telling me." Right? But so she was very kind and helpful. I know when I was younger, I had canes, a walker, and a wheelchair, depending on the circumstances. And they didn't want to give my parents the funding for all three. And my mom sort of fought with the OT and fought with the powers that be that said, when you do different activities, such as, you know, drive, when you go to certain places, you drive, and other places you walk. When you go skiing, you use skis, right? Different activities require different tools, ways of getting there. Why can't people with disabilities
I think
have the
that's
same rights?
That's a really important example of a bias or a myth that you either can do this or you can do that. And that, you know, I often tease people when I'm lecturing. If I'm lecturing on the third floor of a building, I ask how many people took the elevator, and lots of people had their hand up. And I say, well, why did you use the elevator? You can walk. And there are lots of reasons to use the elevator. You have a sore back, you're carrying something, you're tired, you're lazy, whatever. But if you're a wheelchair, you know, if you're ambulatory, then you can walk or you don't need a wheelchair. That's how stupid that is. And I think you said it very well.
Thank you.
Okay. Open-ended question here. Looking for anyone to weigh in on. Why do you think that there are so much paperwork for people with disabilities to do? I think I'm in the process of getting a new van, and March Times has this form that needs to be filled out, and they are saying, well, you might be denying the funding, and I was like, excuse me, I already have a van, so I obviously got the funding before. Why would I be denied a service that I already got before? And I just want to know, why do you think the government is so sticky on the paperwork?
Well, I have some thoughts on this, and I'm actually going through the process of starting to study public policy because I think I would like to understand this process in greater detail, and then I would like to in future help make some changes. But I firmly believe before we try to make changes, we should understand why things are the way they are. So that's why I'm starting to think about going to school for public policy and then hopefully relating it to health policy later on. But I think that part of why this is because often the people who are making these decisions from the top to the bottom don't understand the implications of the decisions that they're making. In situations like ODSP, this might be a controversial viewpoint, but I think there are a lot of people who game the system, and they're aware of that, so therefore they treat us all sort of like criminals.
Right.
My new ODSP office in Toronto is quite nice, but the old one that I had to go to, I had to speak to someone behind glass, which always sort of made me feel sort of like a criminal. But the reason I say that people might be using the system inappropriately is the type of people that I come into contact with when I'm there. I have to go in every month because, especially when I'm working, because I work, I have to declare my income, and I have no issue with this, except that when I go in, I'm often mistreated, and a lot of the time, the people that I interact with in line are clearly not using their money appropriately, and I've been offered drugs on more than one occasion, so it just isn't the best experience, right? But I go in nicely dressed, and people will say to me, the people who work for ODSP will say to me, well, you look very nicely dressed. That's a very nice bag you have. Are you sure you need to be on ODSP?
But let me make a comment that I think is part of this, and I don't disagree with anything you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
You guys both have, and Kelly's daughter has, conditions that started at birth and are part of your life experience. I, as a relatively able-bodied person, may acquire a disability.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that you're talking about, Jessica, the people in the ODSP line include people like you with child onset conditions that are part of your reality, and include people like me who have a bit of back pain and don't really want to work and see if I can game the system. Now, I don't mean that anybody with an acquired disability is gaming the system, but
not everyone, but there does seem to be a number.
But I think that it goes back to Danny's point about that you'd think that there'd be some way that the people who are adjudicating requests like you have would recognize that your form is your file is in a blue is the blue file, which means that you've got a child onset condition that is permanent, and my file is the yellow file, which means it's a recent onset. And there could be some simple things put in place that would not put you guys through this nonsense every time you try to apply for funding.
It's true. I agree.
5 minutes?
There's a few more comments that I want to cover quickly. And Jessica, I'll start with you. Why do you think people with a disability often get treated like little children even when we're adults?
Again, I think that's because people only tend to see people with disabilities in a positive light when they're kids. We do a lot of funding and fundraising for kids, such as Easter Seals, which is an organization that I've worked for and benefited from and am a huge fan of. We don't see, and we're all cute and everything during those times. But we don't see a lot of adults with disabilities. And when we do, sort of like my bias that I just mentioned, people tend to see us as those who are a drain on the system, because it's fun and cute and makes you feel good to help kids, but not adults. So I think it just lends to the misconception that people don't see us enough. as older people who know what's going on and contribute to society. They just see us as perpetually children. I still have people who come up to me and speak loudly to me, or speak like I am dumb, and then, you know, it makes me sound kind of condescending, but I feel it's necessary to point out that I have, you know, 2 diplomas and a degree and a potential for, you know, a master's later on in life. It makes it's really condescending for me to point that out all the time, but I also feel it necessary in some situations to be like, hey, I'm actually one of the smarter people in this room, and if you could respect me as such, that would be fantastic.
Right.
Tina, same question to you. Why do you think people with disabilities get treated like kids?
I think, well, in addition to what Jessica said, and she said it very eloquently, I think that there are people in the so-called disability community who refer to people like Kelly and me as the temporarily able-bodied. And what they mean is that, you know, I'm one fall or one accident away from being a wheelchair user, or having brain damage or whatever. And I think that people with disabilities remind us of the possibility that we may also become disabled. I'm not worried about becoming a woman. So when I'm listening to Jessica and Kelly, it's not threatening me that I'm at risk of becoming a woman. But when I see somebody who's in a wheelchair, I say, my God, you know, that could be me someday. So I think that's part of it, at least.
Kelly, what's your view on it?
I think that Peter and Jessica have hit the nail on the head pretty accurately, and very elegantly, for sure. I think one of the things that kind of is really important for us is that we move away from the language of championing people who are caring for people with disabilities, like I'm some kind of saint or something, because I have a daughter who lives with a significant disability. And the other thing that really irks me is, and this is obviously specific to the Angelman community, but Peter's probably seen it in other situations too, is sometimes the children are referred to as angels. And I just want Kate to be referred to as Kate. Right. Yeah. And right. Yeah. Like that's who she is. She is Kate Meisner, and she's awesome. And she's got this awesome self-confidence about her. And that's the end of it. Right. So I'm really wary of the language that's associated with it as we move through these stages of life.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
Jessica, 2 minutes to you on the topic of employment. Why do you think people with disabilities have trouble gaining employment?
Oh, Danny, you and I could do an entire podcast on this, even given my recent experiences. I think that people with disabilities have trouble gaining employment for often the misconceptions that we've talked about here. I think people who are hiring assume that people with disabilities won't be able to do the work appropriately. And they're scared of anyone that has to do anything remotely different. I also have a learning disability, so that means that the way that I process some information or get things done will have to be a little bit different. Maybe I need a little bit more information. Maybe I need a clear deadline. Essentially what I need is just really solid management, really solid details, as much as you can give me. I understand that things happen last minute, but as much as detail as a manager can give me, about as much as she can give me, really helps me. And sometimes people see that as extra work or taking too long. And people managers, people who hire people tend to be afraid of anything that might change the conventional system, anything that's different. I also think that sometimes, as much as ODSP tries to help us get jobs by letting us keep some of our money and giving us a little bit of extra money just for working, the process in which you have to go through to show your income every month, and often the clerical errors that happen with that that you have to deal with, can be really challenging. I think for some people, they view it as easier just to not work, which is not something I agree with, but given the amount of struggles that I've been through in the last few years, I could definitely have moments where I could see that would be challenging. But ultimately, what I think it comes down to is people being afraid of anything that's different in the workforce.
We're going to have to stop, Danny, because it's 11 o'clock and I have to give up the room that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you joining us today, and you all have really good insight. So like I said, we could go on for a few more minutes, but I understand that everyone has to go. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Positive
Bye.
information.